Hello gamers, PowerWord Heal here, and today we are talking about some community drama, as well as some aspects about GDKP that I've wanted to touch on for a little bit, because I've always found them interesting, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to do it. But yeah, I'll start us off by kind of giving you guys the background information here. So there's a bit of community drama brewing on Classic Era between two content creators. One of them we've covered before, another one we haven't really talked about. So it's Greekwarrio, we've talked about him, and then DwarfLord, who's a kind of like a tank YouTube content creator. I definitely recommend you guys check him out if you're interested in tanking stuff. He does a really good job, and he's very knowledgeable about the game, specifically Classic Era. But basically, I think they were running GDKPs together on Era, and Greek had a friend in the raid, and his friend was docked from his GDKP cut because of performance issues, and basically this kind of spiraled into some drama between the two. I think prior to that they had been friends, according to DwarfLord. He has like a 40-50 minute video on his channel. I'll link it in the description, so if you guys want to watch that, you can. He's actually a pretty funny guy, I think, so when he does these videos, it's kind of like a dry humor a little bit. It can be fun to watch, but I don't really want to talk about the actual conflict so much. Maybe we'll touch on it a little bit in the video, but it kind of centers around this idea of docking, right? So what docking is in a GDKP sense is when you basically reduce somebody's cut, and we'll kind of get into the specifics as we get deeper into the video. But I've wanted to talk about this for a while because it's one of the things that people actually kind of mention all the time when they talk about GDKP being the superior loot system and having this ability to dock players. And people seem to think that this is like a really effective mechanism. It's sort of enforcing standards and player behavior. I would argue that it's probably not really that effective, and personally, whenever I've run GDKPs or I've been a part of GDKPs, I highly encourage players not to dock now. A lot of the GDKPs I've ran like more recently have been with kind of Rock Apes players, not in Anniversary, but in like the game modes before that, and they tend to be pretty heavy on the docking. So I don't have control over these raids fully, right? If I run my own raids, I tend not to dock people. I don't think I've ever docked anyone. I also don't really run that many raids anymore personally, though, but I have back in the day, and I've never docked anyone. And I just have some pretty strong thoughts about it, and I think that they kind of, I don't know if they're really popular or not. We'll have to see. So that's going to be the main point of this video, and I have like a notepad document here helping me because this is going to be a bit of a long one. There's kind of a lot to cover, so it's not really going to be as much about the actual drama as it is about talking about docking in general. So just to reiterate again, what is docking? It's basically like you get a cut at the end of a GDKP run. So what a GDKP is, in case if somebody's really new watching the video, is you'll go to a raid and you will bid on items with gold, and then if you win the item, you pay the gold to the person running the raid, and they get everybody's gold who buys items throughout the whole raid, and that accumulates into a pot. And at the end of the raid, this pot is divvied up between 40 people. Now, it's not quite as simple because sometimes people get, special bonuses to their cut, essentially, because they're a tank or they're a healer or they're some sought-after class, or maybe they do a high amount of DPS or something of that nature. But the idea is that, usually everybody gets a cut. There'll be some situations where some player is coming in as kind of a person who's explicitly getting carried, and in those situations, they may not receive a cut. Usually that's obviously talked about beforehand, right? The idea is like if you have somebody who maybe just hit 60, they're in kind of greens, like literally, and they're not going to contribute to the run, then the raid leader might be like, okay, you can come in, but, you're not going to get a cut at the end. You have to buy stuff. That's the idea. You're here to buy things. You're not here to make gold. Because typically there'll be kind of like one crowd of players that goes to GDKP they want to make gold, and there's another crowd of players that really wants to aggressively buy gear. So that can kind of play out like that sometimes. But basically, at the end of the raid, you get a cut based on the total amount of gold spent for the entire raid, and a dock just means that you lose some of that cut. Now, it can be the whole cut, it can be 25%, 50%, really just depends on the raid and the rules, and we'll kind of get into that more in a moment. But this is kind of I wouldn't say it's like super common, but it's probably fairly common if you're used to playing on Era, because there's not that many GDKPs around, and I feel like this style is sort of the predominant style. Like I know Rock Apes used to run a lot of Era GDKPs on Horde. I have more experience, especially with Era on Horde, so yeah, they've definitely do the docking strategy for sure, and it's basically just to kind of like enforce standards or player behavior. That's why they do it, right? So the idea is that, if you're not doing enough damage, if you're not doing enough healing, if you kind of pull mobs, that potentially could wipe the group or have a chance of wiping the group, if you mess up a mechanic that's like, something like the on Thaddeus where, you can do a bunch of damage to the entire raid or something like that. Potentially chaining people on Horsemen, on Cthulhu, any fight like that, you kind of get the idea. Get in Bomb is probably like a quintessential example of this, where, if you kind of mess up that mechanic, you might get docked, either your whole cut or a percentage of the cut. And the thought process, like I said, is just that, if people think that if you put this over people, then they're going to be more likely to pay attention, right? Like they're going to kind of focus up. They don't want to lose their cut. Everybody's going to be, two hands on their keyboard. Well, I guess that would be bad, huh? Because you probably want a hand on your mouse, but you kind of get the idea. And I don't think it's really that effective, honestly. I think this is one of those things where people, they like to create narratives and stories in their head. I'm not saying this in a negative way. We all do this, right? But I think in the case of docking, it's like anything else in life where you want to be able to have control over a situation, right? And you create all these kind of rule sets to essentially be able to give yourself more control, right? And you want to think that they work because it feels better if that's actually the case, right? If you create a whole elaborate rule set for something and it doesn't actually produce any results, I mean, that just kind of feels bad, right? It not only feels bad because maybe you wasted the time to do it, but on top of that, you didn't get what you were hoping for out of everything. So it's natural to want to create these things and expect that they work. And I just find that it's not really the case most of the time, and why, right? So we'll kind of go through a couple reasons why I think docking is just not very effective. So the first reason is that most of the players that are going to mess up in these runs, and a lot of the players I feel like now that you're sort of encountering on Era, are probably newer. Now, I'm not saying all the players in the run are new, but the players in the run that are, not regulars are most likely going to be kind of newer players that are maybe just leveling up on Era. They've hit max level. Maybe they have a little bit of gear from some 20-mans, dungeons, or something like that, and they're trying to get into some of these runs and see what gear they can get, right? Maybe they've done some Molten Core, maybe they've done some Blackwing Lair, and they're trying to get into a Nax, or if not, maybe they're trying to just get into MCs and BWLs, because those go on as well on Era. So they're probably new players, and they're just going to mess up regardless. Because honestly, a lot of the things in this game, it's sort of a weird game in the sense that on the surface, a lot of the stuff seems easy, and it is very easy, to be honest. But it can be difficult to really know what somebody's talking about until you kind of get into the raid. Maybe if you watch like an actual video guide of somebody kind of crawling through Blackwing Lair from the perspective of your class, and they're kind of showing in detail what you're supposed to be doing at any given point. Shout out to Powerword Heal's raid run-throughs, right? Then maybe that's a little bit different. So if you've watched some of that, maybe you have a bit of preparedness there. But even if you do watch something like some of my videos where I kind of go through step by step what you should be doing at any given point in a raid, if you're a new player, it's a lot of information to take in all at once. You're probably not going to be watching the video while you're raiding, right? You don't really want to be doing that. You want to be trying to focus on what you can, trying to focus on what the raid leader's saying. So you're bound to make a mistake somewhere. And especially with things like pulling mobs, it can be really easy to pull mobs in some of these instances because it's not necessarily super intuitive in terms of, what the distance you're going to pull at is. And there's like this pull in Nax, actually, like the spider wing, like right at the start, where the spiders like pat by. If you've run Nax, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I swear, like, you guys will know if you've run Nax that, like, you can be running Nax with a group of people that you've run Nax with, like, 40 times. And there's a chance this pack is getting pulled regardless. You know, unless you're in, like, a guild that's, like, really, really strict about things. Like, maybe you're in, like, a brick or something like that, and you know, you're just going to get, like, maybe insta-booted because somebody just tilts off the face of the planet because you kind of, like, ruined the run by pulling early or something like that. Then if you're not in a guild like that, then you're probably in a situation where you've seen this get pulled more often than you'd want to admit. And, you know, this particular pack, not necessarily always the end of the world, but there's a lot more packs in Nax like that, and there can be some packs that are even easier to pull than that, in my opinion. And a new player, you know, they have a chance of pulling them for sure. They also have a chance of just messing up a plethora of mechanics they've never seen before. So it's just kind of inevitable, I think, that mistakes are going to happen when you're bringing new people into Nax. And, you know, setting up this expectation of the docking is not really going to solve that. Now, one thing you could argue, before we kind of move on to some of the next points as to why I don't like docking, so a counterpoint here is, well, yeah, but at least if they're, you know, making these mistakes and they're getting docked, then we're getting some compensation. They're getting penalized for it, and I can live with that, you know? I don't mind bringing new players. If they make a mistake, you just dock them, and that's the equivalent exchange, right? It's fair. You know, they wasted our time, so they lose part of the reward. But the problem really is that you don't really gain much from docking people, and DwarfLord actually talks about this in his video, ironically, which, you know, I'd be curious if he watches this video. I'd just like to hear his reaction on it, but yeah, because I think he's absolutely right about this, that, you know, you don't really gain much from docking a player at all. You basically gain nothing, because any cut that you would take is split amongst the 40 players again, right? So 39 other players, I guess, in this case. Now, you know, he mentions in the video that in one of the cases where Greek has docked people, that he's taken the entire cut. You're not really supposed to do that. I don't know if that's exactly true. It seems like from the video that's what happened, right? So if you're doing stuff like that and you are personally pocketing the money, then obviously there's more of an incentive to dock people, but typically that's not how things are done, right? Typically the money that you would dock would be redistributed throughout the raid. So yeah, you're not even really gaining that much. The whole raid's not gaining a ton of compensation. It's not like they even made the cost of their consumes back, most likely, via that dock being split amongst all the people. The second thing is, most people focus up after a wipe, right? And this is something where I think people get trapped in thinking that threats really help, you know, make people perform better. Because oftentimes, if you wipe maybe once, if it's kind of a strict raid, or if it's a more lackadaisical raid, maybe 2 or 3 times on a boss that you really shouldn't be wiping to, the inevitable kind of words will come out of the raid leader's mouth. It's like, okay, guys, like, you know, we're gonna start like really cracking down here. So like, we're gonna loot ban you from the raid if you mess this up, or we're gonna loot ban you on this boss. Like, I've seen this like thousands of times. Or not thousands, but you get the idea. So Veilstraz is like a perfect example of this, where like it can be very easy for a pug, especially. You have a bunch of kind of new players, or just players that are egocentric, want to parse, and they'll pull threat on Veil. Pulling threat on Veil is like classic Blackwing Lair formula for wipe, right? And this happens so often, and people get sick of it. You know, they're really annoyed at a certain point. It's like, why can't you just let the tank get threat? It's such an easy boss, because it really is an easy boss, especially in this version of the game, right? There's not even any tank transition, so just let the tank get threat, and then we'll zug down the boss. And, you know, you wipe 2 or 3 times to Veil, and then all of a sudden you hear it. It's like, okay, if you pull threat on Veil, you're loot banned for this, right? And then you pull again, and the boss goes down, and everybody's happy, and then, you know, you don't really have any problems with the rest of the raid. And I think this can kind of reinforce that kind of threats work really well, right? Because people are like, hey, well, you know, we wiped 2 or 3 times beforehand, but when we issued that threat about banning people for loot, when we actually started to threaten, you know, the thing that they want to come and get from this run, then all of a sudden people started to listen. They started to pay attention. And again, it can be easy to fall into that trap because it's very nice to think of, right? It's very logical. It makes perfect logical sense, right? But people aren't really that logical, and I feel like in most cases, people just need 1 or 2 pulls to kind of get it right anyways, right? So if you're kind of, just walking through a raid or waltzing through it, and you're kind of like on autopilot, maybe you're watching Netflix on the other monitor, you're kind of chilling, maybe you're not even in Discord, you're just laughing with the boys in another Discord or something, and then you wipe, especially if it's kind of your fault on a fight like Veil or something like that, that's going to snap you back to reality in most cases, and you're just going to focus up for the next pull. And if let's say you're a new player and you didn't really know what happened, you're probably getting made fun of or something like that, especially if you did something crazy, and just inevitably you are going to want to know what you did wrong, and you'll probably mention, sorry, like, yeah, I guess I messed that up, how do I not mess that up next time? And then it's going to be explained to you on Discord most likely, and if another mistake happens, it's probably not going to be the same mistake, but most likely you guys are just going to down the boss. So people often attribute that to the threat, right? Like, we're going to loot ban you or whatever. But in reality, you're just not as likely to wipe to a boss that you should be downing multiple times anyway, right? And you're not really going to issue the threat on a boss that you're progging anyway, because if you're progging, then the whole point is to prog the boss. So I'm not saying that, the threat has never worked in any case, right? Or it's never caused somebody to change their behavior. That would be delusional to say that. But I think people overestimate the impact of the threats, and I think that threatening people in some ways can also have negative adverse reactions, right? And it's actually funny because I've seen this kind of blow up in people's face where, you'll kind of, a lot of these pugs have a core of players that, have been playing together a while and sort of lead the run. They shepherd it all the way through. And normally you don't have to worry about your shepherds kind of making mistakes, right? It's normally the players you're bringing, the new players. So inevitably, you wipe a couple times to the boss you're not supposed to, and they'll issue the threat. Then you pull the boss, and then one of their guys messes up. Maybe it causes a wipe, maybe it doesn't, but it's kind of clear. And now you kind of look weird, right? Because it's like, well, do you actually loot ban that person? They're going to be really upset if they get loot banned, and understandably so to a degree, because yeah, sure, you did say that if you mess up this mechanic, you're getting loot banned, so in a certain sense it is fair. But in another sense, they've maybe led this raid through Blackwing Lair like, 30 times, and you've never had a problem with them, they don't mess up at all, and now they're going to mess up this one time, maybe their item drops and they're ineligible to get it because, they made a mistake on Veil or whatever boss it was. It doesn't feel great, right? And I've seen this sort of thing happen, and normally when this happens, people just kind of like forget the rule, right? These rules that are made up ad hoc typically don't, they don't really stand. But something like a docking is a little bit different, because usually that's mentioned explicitly beforehand. It's kind of like in the rules. And in this case, for the DwarfLord scenario, it is in their rules on the Discord. Now, again, this isn't always enforced, right, even though it is on the rules on the website, but it's at least a little bit more tangible than something like those random threats that you kind of get during the raid. But either way, I think they can kind of make people play worse, right? If you sign up to this raid and you see this laundry list of rules, and it's like, you're just like, oh my god, like, everybody's going to be so mad at me. I'm going to lose all the gold that I was going to get from this run, man. I'm just trying to make a little gold because I'm a new player. It can be intimidating, right? And I just don't think that it needs to be handled like that. Personally, from my opinion, my kind of philosophy there would more just be like, look, we expect you to try your best to make the run a successful run for everybody. And if you kind of consistently mess up, then we may have to talk to you about certain things, and it may jeopardize your spot coming back into the future until we know that you understand the mechanics and the encounters properly. But I don't like this idea of kind of just having this laundry list of things that you could like lose a cut for, So let's actually talk about some of those things, because that was a big factor in. Well, it wasn't a big factor, but that was one of the things that's mentioned in the video, right? Like, what are some things you can kind of lose your cut for? So, like, low damage, low healing, AFK. AFK is one where I'm, a lot more liberal on people, removing people's cuts for that, because that's something you can pretty much prevent in most cases, unless you have an emergency or something. Then you can just talk to the raid leader. But obviously you don't want to bring somebody who's going to be just like not even trying. That doesn't make any sense, right? So that I completely understand. But in this particular case, the warlock in question, I believe, who was Greek's friend, was doing low damage overall. He had pretty decent gear, so it wasn't really a gear problem. He was multi-dotting ads on one of the fights. I assume it's the one where we shackle things. And then he died on Thaddeus as well to the polarity, so he failed that mechanic. So those are kind of like the three things that he failed. And typically what'll happen, or from what I see, is that you'll have a penalty associated for sort of like each thing. So if you mess up a mechanic, it's like a certain percent dock. If you pull something, right? So if you ninja pull, it's another percent dock. If you cause like a full wipe, that's another dock, right? Maybe even your whole cut would be docked in that case, potentially. And each one of these things has a penalty, and then you can just sort of like add them up, and then you essentially get the final result. Now, this is a lot more annoying than it sounds, especially if you have a lot of people messing up. And the problem tends to be that, there's a lot of mistakes in any given raid, even in a raid of pretty competent players. Especially in a raid like Nax, because it tends to be long, right? You're talking like 2 to 4 hour raid, and you're just going to be in there in a long time. There's a lot of time to make mistakes, and you could really get nitpicky with this if you wanted, right? Now, most people don't, and they don't because it's very annoying. So the actual gold distribution part of the GDKP is typically handled by like an add-on, like something like Gargle. But for the docking, it's kind of, it's just more annoying in general because there's not really a good way to do the docking automatically. Like, at some point, you have to just input that you are docking the person gold. Now, I think that there are, I haven't used Gargle in a while, but from the like leadership perspective, but I'm pretty sure you can administer docks and Gargle. In fact, in the DwarfLord video, it looked like they were doing that. So that's not the issue, but it's more just the fact that it's a pain because you have to now mentally keep track, like, okay, so he, died to a slime after patchwork, and then he pulled the spiders at the start of the spider wing, and then he almost wiped us on Thaddeus, and, you're trying to keep track of these things, and then it's like, if it's one person, it's whatever, but it's like, if you have like 5 or 6 people making mistakes, right, then that's going to be a nightmare, especially if you get into like a demon run for Nax or something that's like, tons of people are making mistakes. At this point, I mean, you're going to throw away the rubric, right? Because you're just going to be drowning, and you're already trying to like raid lead and stuff, right? You don't want to be keeping track of all these mistakes. You probably don't have a spreadsheet of all 40 players, individual names there that you're just like putting little ones next to or whatever, and then putting the cross through them when they hit 5 or whatever. That's probably not happening, right? And then you get into a situation where things get kind of awkward because it's like, now what you're probably doing is if you're still trying to do docks in a situation like that, you're probably docking like the biggest mistakes, but then people are going to get really angry because it's like, hey, this guy messed up too. Or, this, maybe that didn't cause a wipe, but it could have caused a wipe there. And they probably have a legitimate point, right? And now you're kind of getting into the minutia of like splitting hairs about like what constitutes a dock, what constitutes a 25% dock, a 50% dock, a full dock, things of that nature. In the DwarfLord case, I believe it was 3,000 gold was the pot of this Nax run, so he docked 50%, which ended up being 1,500 gold. So it's quite a big dock, and like if you're a player on Era that has a lot of gold, it's not really that big of a deal to most players. But if you're like a newer player, that could be a pretty big deal. Now, this player in question, I'm pretty sure seems like he buys a lot of gold, so it's not really a problem for him per se. But we'll kind of talk about the issues that he had with it a little bit later on, because I think a lot of players would share the same sentiment there. But yeah, that's kind of how the docking tends to work, is that it's not necessarily an all or nothing thing. It can be broken down into, kind of segments and pieces, which can actually just make it really annoying for the raid leader. So that's another reason why I don't really love docking. And DwarfLord himself even admits this in like the video he talks about. Like he made a Discord post in his Discord or another Discord he was a part of, explaining the situation because people were kind of grilling him on it. And he was basically like, look, guys, like, you know, I'm kind of going strict on these rules because I've been wiping in here a lot with people lately, and it's been really annoying for me. So, you know, maybe you guys kind of got caught in the crossfire, but I just really wanted to have a clean run. I wanted to have high standards, didn't want to wipe. So I was really, I was coming out in force. And, you know, maybe some of these things, like the punishments, weren't really fully thought through. Maybe you shouldn't be punished for, you know, some of these things. But that's the rules that I put forth, and I follow the rules. And, you know, that's that. And I respect that answer from DwarfLord. It's not like a bad answer. Like, I disagree with the concept of docking, but I don't think anything... I don't think there's anything malevolent going on here, right? Like, I don't think he has it out for this guy or anything like that. And I think he really was just trying to be consistent with the rules that he set out. And he didn't want to seem like somebody who's going to make some rules and then not follow up on them, right? He wanted it to kind of like appear principled. So I think that's basically the thought process that was in his head. That's why he ended up docking this guy. And yeah, for everything I've seen from DwarfLord, he seems like a pretty good guy. You know, I haven't actually met him or interacted with him, but I feel like you can sort of get a sense of somebody from their content. And, you know, I've never really seen anything about him that would make me think he's underhanded or he's gutted out for certain players or anything of that nature, right? So I don't think that there was anything malevolent at play here at all. I don't think that he makes the docking rules to kind of be like, haha, I got you, man. Like, I don't think he likes to see people suffer or anything like that when he docks them. I think he was just getting frustrated, and, you know, hey, we've all been there, man. I get frustrated in raids too, right? And he's like, you know what? Like, we're just gonna set these rules down, and hopefully this cleans up the run. And you know, this guy got caught in the crossfire a bit, so he even made a Discord post talking about it, admitting that. But yeah, so that's another reason why, though, I don't really like docking, because yeah, it can get really messy really fast. So, other solutions to the problem, right, is the next thing I was going to talk about. So instead of doing docking, I feel like the most common thing in my mind is just like, if I have somebody who, like, let's say I have somebody in my raid that's performing really poorly, and like I would sort of like want to dock them. Like, I'm not doing the dock, but like I'm kind of like, damn, like this is where a dock would actually kind of come into play, right? This would be the threshold that I would reach where I would dock this guy. In that particular case, I would probably just not bring them to the next run. That's typically what I would do. Or I would like talk to them in Discord and be like, look, you're going to sit out this next run. Maybe you can plug a few Naxes or something, or I can like maybe talk to you one-on-one about kind of what went wrong if you're down with that. And then, you know, if it seems like you kind of get things, we'll bring you back. Maybe it won't be like next raid, but we'll kind of work you in back at some point. And if you do well in that raid, then it's fine. And if not, then, you know, maybe you'll have to chill out a little bit more time. So it's almost like, you know, bringing somebody back in kind of like any sport or anything like that, if somebody's kind of underperforming at a position, right? And in this particular case, I feel like the stakes are even lower because you're not really doing a competition when you're running GDKPs, right? And it's not as if sometimes there's like only one spot available, or like you need the best player on your team to be playing that spot. Like in sports, it can be a little bit tricky, right? Because it's like, yeah, you want to develop maybe the guy who is trying his best to get better, but at the same time, you need to play the guy who's already the best to win, right? And, you know, obviously sports are a competitive endeavor, so you want to give your team the best chance to win, so you don't want to be handicapping your team trying to get somebody else experience, right? It's not really the same in WoW. You can kind of afford to be a little bit more flexible, especially because a lot of times you'll end up having things like no-shows and things of that nature. So what you could do is you could maybe just put this guy on the bench for the next raid or a couple raids, and then, you know, if nobody's there, you can bring him in. He doesn't get first priority. Eventually, he's going to get back in, and he could potentially prove himself, you know, fix the mistakes that he had from last time, And like I said, usually I'm up for talking to people about this and stuff like that if they want to know what they need to do better. So I'm much more in favor of like that approach of just like, not bringing them if it's bad enough and then slowly working them back in over time. Or if it's really bad, let's say they have just like a terrible attitude and like they're a terrible player, you can just blacklist them from the run, right? So there's always that option as well. But yeah, I tend to be more in favor of that than just like kind of docking somebody. And the last thing here that I wanted to mention is, and this is going to be like the longest segment probably, is it's kind of like the principle of the matter. And this is something that is a little bit more nebulous and can be hard to pin down, but I think it is kind of a reality for most people, is that people don't really like getting singled out, period, but especially not when they're being like actively punished. So to kind of give you, an example of this. So if you guys have ever like watched WoW videos from way back in the day, there's this guy like Rignaros, right? And he has some clips. He's like a raid leader in Blood Legion back in the day, and he has clips where he just tears into people. Sometimes he's like running with sort of pugs, and he's raid leading the pug, and he's tearing into people. Other times it's his guild members, and he was basically kind of known for doing this. And some people really didn't like it. It really kind of rubbed them the wrong way, especially the people that were getting kind of dug into, right? And there's tons of notorious clips you can find on YouTube of like him just screaming at somebody, them starting to scream back or whatever. But the funny thing is like, as much as he screamed and as much as he yelled sometimes and as angry as he got, I don't recall there ever being like loot docking. Now in the actual Blood Legion guild, I'm sure if you had somebody that was like messing up all the time, you're going to be more reluctant to give them loot. So I'm sure it kind of happened in some ways, but there was never like an explicit docking or anything like that, or banning of loot privileges, because back then, in a lot of those videos, it wasn't GDKP, but there was never like, oh, you're not getting loot off this boss. That wasn't like the ultimatum or anything like that. It was kind of just like play better. Like he was in the Marines, I think, so he was like very like hardcore, and he didn't really mean anything super bad by it, but he really wanted to just kind of like shock players, I think, like, hey man, like you're better than this, pick it up, essentially, right? Kind of like a Marines ethos type of thing. And because of that, he never really added any threats to it. It was never like, oh, you're not going to get loot or anything like that. And I think honestly, that made it tolerable for a lot of the people. Like, I think the moment you start to like tell people they're not getting loot, it really kind of goes sideways. And it's, in this case, it's not like he's not getting loot, but he's not getting his cut. Like, he's not getting something that he should have gotten, is sort of the idea. And I think it's less about the actual thing. Maybe in the case if it was like a really big item, people would freak out. Like if you were supposed to get like a Gressel, and maybe you blocked people on KT, but you still down the boss, and the raider's like, oh, you blocked people, you messed up the mechanic. Yeah, you had that soft reserved or hard reserved or whatever. Sorry, you won the roll, but you're not getting it. That would cause people to flip, right? But for most of the pieces of gear, or even just docking in general, I don't think that it's the actual gear loss or the gold loss that would really push people over the edge themselves. It's more just the fact that the raid leader is like willing to inflict the loss on them, if that makes sense. It's almost like going a step further than just being verbally reprimanded. And I think it has to do with, it's more of like a status thing than anything else, right? Because it's kind of like people tear into each other all the time, and people are sort of used to that. But when you add sort of like a tangible consequence to it, I think at that point it starts to begin to feel a lot more like a humiliation. Now, it can already feel like a humiliation sometimes to begin with, because we've all seen this happen in classic WoW raids. Like, somebody messes up, people just like, relentlessly kind of go at them. A lot of times it'll be good-natured. Sometimes it's bad-natured. But if you have it be bad-natured and they're taking the loot away, right, that's almost like an insult to injury. It's like a kick in the shin, And I think that really, really rubs people the wrong way. I think that that's what happened here. And you can see that in the replies from Greek's friend in the Discord, because they're like arguing in a Discord, essentially. And he keeps talking about how it's the principle. And I sort of understand what he means there, because it's like, it's not about the fact that and especially in this guy's case, that he lost 1,500 gold because this guy just buys tons of gold, right? It's the fact that, he would take it that far, like that he cared enough to... I feel like this guy thinks that DwarfLord is trying to like humiliate him in front of the raid, because it's not just like, okay, I'm gonna kind of dress you down a little bit for messing up. It's like you're gonna pay your dues, like you're lesser than these other people in the run. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that DwarfLord, he definitely didn't intend it to come off like that. Like I said, I think he seems like a pretty good guy. I don't think he would have any malevolent intent like that, but I think it's something that people can intuit themselves. It doesn't have to be the intention of the speaker for the person being spoken to kind of internalize that a bit. Now, you might argue that that's on the person themselves, and I could see that argument, that's fine, but I think this is like a natural intuition that a lot of people have, and I say that because I've just observed it a lot over the course of my life, not just even in WoW, but in like other areas as well, right? So I feel like people just they respond very, very negatively when they're not only being dressed down, but there's like, it's almost like the teacher telling the kid to go in the corner, right? It is that sort of, it has that bit of humiliation ritual. It hits a little bit harder, and it really, really gets at people in the worst way. And I wanted to get into the status thing a little bit more about that, because I think in this particular case, what caused everything to get so toxic is the sort of like perceived loss of status potentially. And this is just speculation. This is kind of like the final part of the video, but this is speculation on my part. So I don't really know the guy. I don't know Greek's friend that well. The only thing I'm kind of basing this off of is what he was talking about in Discord, and then also other people that I know that have whaled in runs, because I've done like a lot of GDKPs over the course of my WoW playing career. A lot of people would probably be, again, shocked to know that, since I'm the anti-GDKP guy, but like I said, can't beat him, join him if it's in the game. I'd prefer it not be in the game, but I'm not going to handicap myself if it is. So I've done a ton of GDKPs, and I've played with a lot of whales, especially kind of in the latter end, like toward, before they kind of banned GDKPs. Leading up to that, I was playing with people who were whaling a lot, because the people that I was running with were essentially selecting whales explicitly to be in these runs, right? And the culture of the whales can be very interesting, because I think that a lot of them kind of get something. Some of them just want to get gear, right? So it's not all of them, but some of them really do get something from kind of being the big bitter guy. It's almost like that psychological sort of reaction, or sorry, not reaction, but that it's almost like they think they're that guy at the Vegas high stakes gambling table, where it's kind of like it's a spectacle. Everybody is watching them bid, and kind of like almost like everybody's watching that guy gamble. They're kind of the center of attention. People are like, oh wow, that guy's got a lot of gold, that guy's got a lot of money. They're wondering like, how high is he going to bid? It's a bit of a prestige thing. And they have a lot of fun with it, I've noticed these people. Like, sometimes they'll bid each other up over nonsense items. Like, you'll have two whales that, like, in some cases it's an item they at least need. In some cases, they'll bid up, like, an obsidian edge blade or something. Like, that's a bit rarer, to be honest. It doesn't happen a ton, but I've seen it happen before. I've seen it happen where, you have a guy who's dropping, like, over 10k on something like Maladath for a mage, or something like that. He's literally competing with like rogues and warriors for this weapon. And in some cases, it's like, in some cases this is done like out of toxicity or spite, because they don't like those players, or they're just trying to be a complete douche. But in other cases, it's like the effect is that they're a douche, sort of, but they're not even trying to be a douche. They just want to almost show that they're like a big baller. They're like, it's like the big baller brand kind of version of WoW Classic, right? You go into a GDKP and you start bidding on everything, and you bid everybody up. So I've seen this happen before, and basically a lot of the people in the run tend to respond positively to this sort of energy and people like this, right? For a couple of reasons. Obviously, if you're one of the people in the run that's sort of like getting you're just there to kind of collect gold. You love to see this, right? Like, I when I was doing these runs, I was doing like 6 of them at one point during SOM, Season of Mastery, like 6 raids, and I was doing the little raids as well in between. I would love when we got whales in the runs that would like bait each other up. It was just like, and they were having like the pissing contest between them, because that just makes my pot go huge, right? So everybody in the raid is sort of like egging them on. Like, I wasn't really one who would egg them on, but I love to benefit from it, I'll admit it. But tons of people in the raid are like, oh yeah, man, like, yeah, outbid him. You gonna let him outbid you? Really? You don't have the gold? What are you, poor, man? This, that, right? And they'll just kind of like outbid each other they'll stoke the flames to like the nth degree. And I think that, again, this really plays into those people's psyches. They love that. They love that people are like almost adoring them, egging them on, right? Wanting to see them bid higher and higher and higher. So there's a status that comes with that. And they enjoy a privileged status in the raid. The raid leader's going to get them in all the time, right? And people might get them in for stuff even outside of that raid, whether it be other runs or other stuff they need. Maybe they'll run them through ZG and get them enchants for the helmet they just bought, that they just dropped a bunch of gold on or something like that. There's like perks to being this type of person. It really is being like that kind of like high roller in Las Vegas, but it's, the microcosm is the video game in this case, right? And they just kind of get high off that. And something like DwarfLord did is like taking a sledgehammer to that image and reputation, right? Because this guy, I don't know if you guys have seen Goodfellas, right? But it reminds me of the part in Goodfellas. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen Goodfellas, but it's a really good movie. But there's kind of a part where there's one of the Italian mobsters, and this guy has crazy ego, right? He's like I forget, is it Joe Pesci that played the particular guy? I forget his name in the movie, but yeah, he's just like this guy who had insane ego. And at one point, one of the kind of lower people in the club, like just one of the servants, talks back to him. Because this guy had been harassing the servant forever. And this guy like talks back to him at one point. And he just like loses it. Like he freaks out because like this guy, it's basically like a pure attack against his ego. And it kind of is like almost stripping him of his authority in that moment, right? Because this lowly servant guy just talked to him like that. And it's sort of like that in the GDKP. Like, obviously the stakes aren't as serious and it annoys in the mob here, but it's sort of the same vibe, except it's coming from the top in this case. Like, DwarfLord's almost being the guy, like, he's dousing, like, this guy, he just thinks he's all that, and DwarfLord just pouring a bucket of cold water right in his head, and kind of extinguishing his flame a bit. And I think that's what really set this guy off and kind of rubbed him the wrong way, because like it's almost like a humiliation in front of the entire 39 other players, because it's not about the goal. It's just about the fact that he wasn't special enough or had a privileged enough status in this raid to be immune from the lashing, if that makes sense. And typically these people are, right? I mentioned at the start of the video that there's a bunch of different criteria you can kind of go on when you are assembling these runs. And like sometimes you'll have people who are, pure carries or pure buyers. And a lot of times even if somebody's a pure buyer, they get taken care of as long as they are spending lots of gold. And apparently that was the situation with this guy, with Greek's friend. Like, he carried a lot of the pots, not just this pot, but previous pots. So he's like the big whale, the big spender. And usually you get special privileges, so like nobody's going to really like talk badly about you if you're not doing good damage or anything like that. Because again, they're all just focused on the fact that you were bringing the wealth. And it's kind of understood, even if it's not, explicitly agreed upon beforehand, that, hey, like, maybe this guy is not like the best player, or he's not going to try that hard in the raid or whatever, or he's not very geared, or it could be a number of different things. He's not the right class, but it doesn't matter. We're bringing him along anyway, and he's going to just bump up the pot, and everybody's going to kind of ignore it, and that's going to be that. It's almost like it's understood, and DwarfLord just wasn't about that. He was just like, nope, I set out these rules. I'm going to follow these rules. It probably annoyed him to see these mistakes being made because even though I don't think that they actually wiped, he's just thinking in his mind like they could have wiped us, and I kind of understand that. So he didn't play ball here, and I think Greek is used to people playing ball with him. The buyer, Greek's friend, is definitely probably used to people playing ball with him because he's spending tons of gold in every run, and from his perspective, it's kind of like, really, bro, like you're gonna do this to me, like I'm the one, I'm getting everybody the money. Everybody comes to this run because they want to get paid, and I sort of understand that perspective because, DwarfLord mentions in the video he's against gold buying and all that, and I'm not saying this is necessarily hypocritical, but we all know what's going on when you bring somebody like Greek's friend here who is like flashing his crypto wallet and he has like $45 million in it or something, with the implication being, I can buy as much gold as I want. Like, we know what the outcome is going to be when you bring somebody like this to the raid, right? This person probably RMTs, they're going to buy a lot of gold and they're going to spend it on a bunch of items in the raid. And everybody is fine with this because they want to benefit from it, essentially, right? So it's a little bit weird in some sense to be like, okay, like we're fine with that aspect. We're fine with this guy just massively buying a ton of gold, but we have to like stick to our principles about, how we conduct the raid. Now, that's not necessarily wrong, right? You can be of those two things. Like you can be like that can be where you draw the line. So I'm not saying DwarfLord is in the wrong there. But I understand where this other guy is coming from and why it's probably like a culture shock where he's just like, okay, like what? This guy is actually docking me? Like, why does he care that much? Right? And again, I don't think DwarfLord even did it with the intention of it being a culture shock. It's just, I think he just wants to seem consistent. He doesn't want to put up rules and, not follow them and have people think like, well, then this guy's a clown. Like, why is he even making the rules in the first place? I think that's the general gist of what's going on there. But yeah, it's just a clear mismatch of expectations is I think what happened. And yeah, that's why we have the drama. But ultimately, this is why I think it's generally not a good idea to dock people. I think it's really about that last point. Like we mentioned like 2 or 3 points, but that last one, there's something psychological about attaching the punishment with the reprimandation that really gets at people's core. And, I'm not like a psychologist, so that part of the video maybe we have to leave for another day, but it's something I've observed that bothers people greatly, and not just in video games, in pretty much everywhere you see it. And I think we probably touched on a little bit as to why that is, but I'm sure there's more to be said, but that's probably it for this video. We've been ranting enough already. But yeah, if you guys are ever running a GDKP, I don't recommend docking. Again, like it's not like a moralistic thing or anything like that. I just think it tends not to work as you think it might, and you probably think it's helping in some cases where, in my opinion, it's probably not, because more often than not, people do just want to kind of get to the raid. They want to have a clean night. And if you have people who are really messing around, really don't care about wasting other people's time, you can always just not bring them the next week, right? So that's my thoughts on the situation. If you like this, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys next time. See ya.